Hola a todos y bienvenidos a Habla Español con Harrison. Hello and welcome to Speak Spanish with Harrison. En el video de hoy vamos a hablar de los géneros en español. In today's video, we're going to talk about the genders in Spanish language. This is such an important topic because you'll run into it in pretty much every single sentence that you say in Spanish. And especially if you speak English as your native language, this concept of gender is probably totally new to you. So I'm going to cover all the basics, the patterns, how to learn about Spanish gender, and unfortunately there are also lots of exceptions, but I'm going to leave that to a different video. In this video, we're just going to talk about the normal, the regular, basic stuff. So let's get started. The first thing I want to point out is the Spanish gender is actually quite different from what you might expect. Like male is masculine, female is feminine. It actually doesn't really work that way. Obviously that is the case when you're referring to people or pets, but in Spanish actually nouns also have gender. For example, la mesa, table, is a feminine noun. El vestido, dress, is a masculine noun. And along with that, we have pronouns, adjectives, articles, and they all have masculine and feminine versions as well. If this is the first time that you're learning about this topic, it might not make sense all at first, but just stick with me and I promise you in a second, you're gonna understand it a lot better. So basically, all things in Spanish has a gender. I already gave you 2 examples, but let me just give you a few more. For example, la idea, idea, is feminine. El mundo, the world, is masculine. La silla, the chair, is feminine. But the gender of a word isn't necessarily related to the meaning of that word. Like I said, el vestido, dress, is actually a masculine noun. It has more to do with the root of a word. Perhaps it comes from Latin, it comes from Greek, or from Arabic. But there are patterns that we can follow, and that's what I'm gonna explain next. So generally speaking, when you see a noun that ends in the letter O, that means that it's a masculine noun. For example, mundo, world, carro, car, libro, book. These are just a few examples. So to refer to these words or to describe these words, we will also use masculine adjectives and masculine pronouns and masculine articles as well. So if you want to refer to the book, it would be el libro. In plural, that would be los libros. So el and los are the definite articles that we say in grammar to describe masculine nouns. And if you want to talk about some books or just one book in general, it would be un libro or unos libros. These are the indefinite articles that I mentioned earlier, but this is just some grammatical terms. You don't have to remember that. And for feminine nouns, it's the same. Casa, house, idea, idea, silla, chair. And if you want to refer to the chair, that would be la silla. And if it's plural, that would be las sillas. So la and las, these are the definite articles for feminine nouns. And if you want to talk about just one chair or some chairs, that would be una silla or unas sillas. Now, so these are the general pattern. Obviously, there are exceptions, and like I said, I'm going to cover all the exceptions in a different video because otherwise this video is going to be very, very long. Now, there's something unique I want to point out as well. It doesn't really happen when you're talking about things, more so when you're referring to people, animals, or pets, more so. That is the gender of groups. So when you're referring to a group of females, obviously the gender of that group would be considered as feminine, plural feminine. And if you're talking about a group of males, the gender of that group would be considered as masculine, plural masculine. But what if you're talking about mixed groups? For example, a group of 4 women, 1 man, and 4 men, 1 woman, how do we define that? So basically, as long as it's a mixed group, it doesn't matter what the ratio is, it's the gender of that group is considered as masculine, plural. So for example, if I'm talking about my cousins, even if I have 5 cousins that are female and only 1 cousin that it's a male, if I refer to them as a group, that would be mis primos. And you can see I use masculine, plural. That's because it's just a mixed group. It doesn't matter what the ratio is. It could be 100 female and 1 male. It would also be masculine, plural. So that's just how the gender of groups work in Spanish. And following that, I want to talk about how we change endings of words and adjectives. As I kind of already shown in the examples, adjectives in most cases would change their endings to match the gender of the thing that they're describing. For example, blanco is white. Blanco and blancos are used to describe masculine things, and blanca and blancas are used to describe feminine things. And just to give you another example, pequeño, small. Pequeño and pequeños are used to describe masculine things, and pequeña and pequeñas are used to describe feminine things. Now, the gender of things, they don't change. For example, la silla, the chair, is always feminine. El piano, the piano, is always masculine. La pared, the wall, it's always feminine. But when you're referring to people and some animals, and including pets as well, you would change the ending of a word to match the gender as well. For example, a very, very common word that you probably know, amigo, friend. And you would use amigo and amigos for masculine, amiga and amigas for feminine. Notice how we change the ending of a word to reflect different genders. And just to give you a different example, primo, which is cousin in Spanish. So you would use primo and primos for masculine, and prima and primas for feminine. So as you can see, primo, prima, primos, primas, we're also changing the ending of a word. And same thing goes for some animals and pets. For example, perro, dog, you would use perro and perros for masculine, perra and perras for feminine, gato, cat, gato and gatos for masculine, gata and gatas for feminine. And this applies to a lot of the professions as well. For example, abogado, lawyer, you would use abogado and abogados for masculine, abogada and abogadas for feminine. Another example, ingeniero, engineer. You would use ingeniero, ingenieros for masculine, ingeniera, ingenieras for feminine. So as you can see, there are many examples. When a word ends in o, that's masculine. When a word ends in a, it's for feminine. And obviously there are many exceptions. Again, I'm going to cover that in a different video. Now, to wrap up this video, I'm going to give you 7 different examples to help you understand how gender works in Spanish. And you'll notice how different parts of the sentence need to be congruent with the gender of the thing that you're talking about. First example, el carro es blanco. Very simple sentence, the car is white. Now, carro, car, like I mentioned earlier, is a masculine noun. That's why I used el carro, the masculine singular version of the definite article. El carro, the car, es blanco, is white. Now, the adjective white also needs to be masculine singular version, which is blanco. So together, el carro es blanco. Now, a different example, la pared es blanca. The wall is white. Pared, like I mentioned earlier, the wall is feminine. So I also need to use feminine singular version of everything, which is why I used la pared es blanca. Next example, María es una niña tranquila. Maria is a very, easygoing, laid-back girl. And because we're talking about Maria, a girl, obviously singular, we need to align all the other parts of the sentence along with that fact. That's why we said María es una, that's the indefinite article, una niña tranquila. The easygoing or laid-back, we also need to use feminine singular version, which is tranquila. Next example, ellas son mis primas. They are my cousins. In this case, I'm referring to my female cousins. So the gender of the group is considered as feminine plural. That's why I used ellas son mis primas. So everything in that sentence needs to be aligned with feminine plural. Next example, tengo unos libros en mi mochila. I have some books in my backpack. And libros, like we mentioned earlier, is a masculine noun, but libros is masculine plural. That's why we use the masculine plural version of the indefinite article as well, which is unos. That's why I say tengo unos libros en mi mochila. Next example, la casa es muy cara. Casa, house, as you can see, it ends in a, and normally it means it's a feminine noun, which is why we need to align everything else in that sentence along with that fact. That's why we said esta, this, but in feminine singular version. Esta casa es muy cara, expensive, also needs to be in feminine singular version, which is cara. Final example, los muebles de esta marca son buenos. The furniture of this brand is pretty good. And obviously furniture in English, it's incountable, but in Spanish, it's countable, which is why we have los muebles, basically like pieces of furniture. You can understand it that way. Now we have two different nouns in this sentence. First, we have los muebles, pieces of furniture. I'm referring to plural, masculine. And then we have esta marca, this brand. So that is a singular feminine. That's why I said this brand, esta marca. But because we're talking about furniture plural, the adjective at the end, good, also needs to be in plural masculine. So again, we say los muebles de esta marca son buenos. All right, so that's it for this video, and I know it's a confusing topic probably if this is the first time that you're learning about it. And here's my tip to make it a little bit easier for you to understand. So basically, whenever you're studying a noun or adjective, attach the gender to it. So if you're memorizing mesa, table, don't just do it that way, but add in the gender as well. For example, la mesa, table. That way you know that it's a feminine noun. And if you're learning an adjective, adding both versions as well. Blanco, blanca, negro, negra, pequeño, pequeña. That will make it easier for your brain to react when you're describing different things. All right, that's it for this video. I've got some construction going on next door, so hopefully that's not very disturbing to this video. And hopefully this video has helped you understand more the topic of Spanish gender. And like I said, these are the regular rules, the normal stuff. And we have lots of exceptions as well. That's what I'm going to cover in the very next video. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And like always, if you find this video helpful, please leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe as well. And I'll see you in the next one. Hasta luego.